Well, I am so grateful you're here. It is Brad Stine Has Issues, where comedy, conservatism, and Christianity collide in a cacophony of clarity. Very special guest tonight, Justin Brierley, who did the unbelievable podcast for years and years and years with some of the biggest known Christians and atheists debating for years. He's got a brand new book called, and it's out this week, Why I Am Still a Christian. He is going to be a wonderful guest. I promise you're going to like this, and you're going to want to buy his book. But meanwhile, as we tape this, and I always preface it with as we tape this, because when else would I say it? We're taping it. Might as well say it now. It is Good Friday. Wyatt, Jesus was crucified today. What's so good about that? Yeah. Well put. Stumbling, grumbling, confused, befuddled.
Look, I came in today expecting a conversation, not a riddle, okay?
Riddle me this. What is so good about being crucified?
You get a bird's eye view of the surrounding area?
Yes, that. Well, you're trying to be an optimist in a pessimistic moment.
I mean, what else can you do?
Wyatt, let me tell you a very powerful word, and it's powerful because it's not onomatopoeia. It's not that, but it's a word that really, I think, is viscerally effective in defining what it means, and the word is excruciating. If you hear that word, doesn't it make you just feel excruciated?
It definitely doesn't make me feel good.
Yeah. Well, do you know what the word where the word excruciating comes from?
You just said it.
Yeah, but I mean the etymology. Is it the etymology?
Etymology, I think?
Of it, yeah.
No.
From the cross.
Ah, really?
Excruci, which is cross in Latin. So it literally is, because crucifixion has been known historically as one of the most brutal, painful, horrifying ways to die. First off, you're nailed. They drive spikes through your wrists and your feet. Hey, into wood. They hold you up. So what happens is, because your hands are like this, you are dropped. You can't breathe. So because somehow it makes it difficult to get air in. So you have to push yourself up to be able to bring air in. But you have to do that off of feet that have been drilled in with spikes. Holy criminy sakes. And to breathe, and then you drop back down, and so you eventually suffocate. It is excruciating from the cross. So that's where that word came from, and there must be a word, a terminology. You usually know these things, or at least you look it up and then give the illusion that you know these things. There must be a term for words that describe something effectively. It's almost onomatopoeia, I can't even say it, because it kind of makes you feel what the word means, but it doesn't sound like the thing like zipper or boom, right? Or whatever the other words that would fit that description is. But anyways, that's what it meant for the cross. Now, of course, when people are watching this, it's a Monday night, so it's already happened, and the good news is Christ has risen from the grave. So not only do we get Friday finished, and people are saying, well, why are you filming it on Friday? Because tonight, when we're watching it, it's Monday. Can't you just give us the courtesy of taping it the same night that we've decided to watch you? If we're going to have to watch it, shouldn't you have to do it the same day? And the answer is no. That's my podcast. I can kind of do it whatever I want. No, the reason is because we weren't going to be around to be able to do it when we wanted to do it. Wyatt, I missed going live.
You missed going live?
Yeah, when we did it live, it was like, uh-oh, here we go, boom. And then we were on Facebook Live. Wasn't it Facebook Live event?
Yeah, and then you cough halfway through your sentence, and then we have to say to the audience, well, I guess that's staying in the cut.
Yeah, right. But can you see that door open by any chance? In the camera. On screen.
No.
Oh, okay. That's
Well,
all that
actually, hold on.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Well,
The
I
top.
don't like it.
Okay, well, why'd you open it?
Well, I was getting something out of that earlier.
I mean, that's your side of the studio. That is your responsibility, man.
Indeed, it is. Speaking of my side of the studio, today something happened to me that I found, what would be the word? Well, reminiscent. I was going to say ironic, but not really. Reminiscent of a bit that I did. Now, I don't know. I'm still your dad, right?
Last time we checked, yeah.
Okay. So, but that doesn't mean that you're an expert on all of my bits, my comedy bits. I mean, I don't know. I guess maybe. I don't even know if you've ever watched a full concert video of mine.
I have watched basically all of your concert videos. You kidding me?
In one full setting or in bits and pieces?
No. Like literally the DVDs that you had, I've watched front to back.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't know. How would I know that?
I mean, I would figure you must have at least known if the DVDs were gone.
You know what? Didn't you used to watch, now that I think about it, with your friends maybe?
Yeah.
Okay. What friends did you watch it with?
I have no idea.
Because they're no longer part of your grid.
Or living in this part of the country.
That's true. Well, listen, the reason I say that is because there was I'm going to have to say, and this might just simply be because it was the first DVD launch that I did, actually DVD, just album launch. It was never an album, but it was a VHS when I first did this. Put a Helmet On, I think, is my most famous album. But I'm guessing because it was kind of the first that launched me into the world of Christian conservatives to say, this guy's doing comedy for you people. So maybe it just had a head start because it went first. But I will say this way, I think more iconic material, if I can be so bold as to think that any of my material has an iconic status. But if so, it came out of that album. First off, the whole Christmas rant ended up as a sample in the Go Fish song Christmas with a capital C. So that got famous from that. The Bible rant, why the Bible should be considered different and Christianity should be considered unique of all the belief systems in history, ended up being pulled out and put on other people's podcasts, put on other people's links or whatever you call it, what do you call them, commentary videos, and have gotten millions of views and shares. And that was the rant about the Bible and why you should consider it. Put a Helmet On, the term, the whole name of the album became a catchphrase of mine. Put a helmet on and slam it down tight. Matter of fact, it's this album cover right here, which I don't think people can see. But anyways, it's part of the giant album cover that we have in our walls that we did to gussy up, if we can use that term, gussy, in mixed company. But we gussied up our studio with album covers. But one of them was bugs. Bug right. Where's the bug rights activist? You remember that by any chance, Wyatt? Any recollections of what that bit was about?
Oh, yeah, bugs. You mean the one with the Raid cans and the stuff and that stuff? Or are you talking about the other one?
No, that was in Tolerate This. Yeah, that was in Tolerate This. That was about the man in a can is Raid, where Mom really taught me about how women just drowned.
Look, if
bugs.
you buy the whole can of Raid, you may as well use the whole can.
No, no. I'm not anti raid abuse. What I'm getting at is that wasn't part of it. But what it was I did a whole routine about animal rights activists. The very premise of the idea of animal rights activism was that people who are hardcore, fully in, all invested animal rights activists normally consider are neo-Darwinists. They believe that the world came about by nothing, and then it appeared, and then dead matter or inert matter also became biologically living matter. A miracle, of course, but not to them. They don't believe in miracles. Well, that one, but they don't call it a miracle. They just say, you know, left to itself, chemicals will always become self-aware. I know, son. It's as logical and as you know, scientific as it gets. But it was a sense of the fact that because animals don't have contemplative access to their agency, they don't use reasoning and logic and philosophy and so forth and so on. Because they don't do that, they are below us in sophistication. It doesn't mean that we abuse them. As a matter of fact, because we are higher than them and we can choose not to abuse, and by the way, Wyatt, they don't. If I'm a tiger and I'm hungry and I see a poor little broken-legged lamb, you would think he'd go over there and nudge it over to his mama. Oh, poor little broken lamb, little lamb shank, broken-y. Here, go to mom. Give my little mama feed. Eats him! Chomps him, rips his neck out.
Well, why wouldn't he bring the lamb back to mama? That's going from an appetizer to an entree.
Amen, Wyatt. I love how you think. You'd make a great leopard.
I certainly hope so.
Well, anyways.
Because if I was a leopard, I'd need to be good.
Oh, my goodness. And yet, I'm sure leopards probably have things that go after them. I mean, that's kind of the law of the jungle. But then here comes humans saying, you know what, that's not humane. And I make a whole joke about, well, we get the word humane from the word human. And the only reason that we would consider being humane, morally superior to animals is because they don't act humane. They act animally, which is less moral, which is what makes humans stand out, or one of the many things that makes it.
And it's also way less fun to say.
What?
Animalese instead of humane. Humane. Humane is
Animally.
fun. Animalane just it sounds like you're trying way too hard.
Yeah, right.
It's like you're trying to invent a word and that just doesn't need to exist. Does that make sense?
No. Give me a word that would be a word that represents a word that is trying to be formulated that doesn't exist. What would that word be?
I mean, we come up with words like that all the time. Like, wasn't it last week that we invented slookanoopen?
That's true.
Like, does that sound like a word that has any right to exist or be uttered by humans?
I want it to because it's
Is that
funny.
a humane word to say?
Well, you know what? Because it's so funny to hear, especially your pronunciation of it. And I think you coined the term, if I'm not mistaken.
I did. I will have T-shirts.
Yeah. So I don't blame you.
I mean, look, if you struck gold, you keep digging.
Amen, my son. I have taught you capitalism well. Well, here's what I was getting at.
Capitalism with a capital C.
Oh, I love the callback. See, you're learning from your daddy who taught you comedy. And yet, you know, I can be honest with you, and those who are big fans of Brad Stine Has Issue, and there's 4 of them, they come on this program because they love our banter, or at least that's part of it, or they endure our banter to teach themselves patience so they can get to the guests who they actually care about. Which one is
Our guests must be humbled by our banter before they get to the actual good stuff being the interview.
Not humbled. They appreciate that we ramble on, so they go, well, man, when they hear our thing, it's going to sound like pristine.
Yeah.
Compared to what we just
So
endured.
that does beg the question: what's the difference between a banter and rambling?
Well, banter gives the illusion that there's a back and forth, an interplay, as though that it has a coherence. Whereas, what was the other word?
Rambling.
Rambling sounds like you really are like careening down a hill. One wheel has come off. The guardrails have already been dinged and smashed. You're heading right to the cliff. Everybody sees it coming, and nobody can do a dang thing about it.
Well,
that to me is more of a rambling.
Well, yeah, but if you're rambling between 2 people, isn't that just a poorly made banter?
Well, I don't even know if it should be allowed access to the word banter if it's...
Well, why not? A banter is just a conversation between 2 people going back and forth. If you're just ranting back and forth between 2 people, isn't that just a really bad banter? Or banter is just really good rants?
Well, and can rant be a rant in dialogue, or is a rant kind of saved for like a monology moment, like one guy?
And then I think you mean soliloquy, right? Not monology.
Monologue is
Yeah, monologue.
one
But
guy.
a soliloquy is also that, but it's just isn't it like the character talking out loud to
So
the audience?
soliloquy would be a sophisticated uh, rant.
Are we not sophisticated here?
You know what? I got a way we could figure this out, Wyatt.
Okay, how?
What if we added a new segment to Brad Stine Has Issues? I think what it would be what we would normally consider a rant. But what maybe people can learn from this is, what if it isn't a rant? What if it is in fact a soliloquy, and you simply didn't know because it was couched in a rambling style, so you didn't understand you were being taught. You know what I think we should call it? Because anything that I rant about, I hope is true, right? I mean, I hope I'm trying to get you somewhere that has an end game that has value. I hope it's insightful. I hope it's informative. I hope it's data driven. I hope it is compelling. I hope it's intriguing. And I hope in the end you might be a little more, I guess, a little bit more deeper in your objective observations of an idea. Doesn't mean you have to agree with me, by the way, but at least perhaps it allows you to do what all great conversation should do, which is either have you be even deeper and more committed to what you believe as true, or to reevaluate what you believe is true. Either one of those, I think, has the most positive effect in an interaction or a dialogue between two people who are stepping back and allowing somebody to move that into a monologue, which some would consider a rant, but others might see as a soliloquy.
So
go ahead.
what you're saying is that
Yeah.
we need to make a new segment,
Yeah.
a short segment,
Okay.
that's just about the truth.
Yes.
I think I know what we should name that segment, and I think you do too.
Moment of truth.
I was gonna say toothache, but you know what? Mine's better. Let's go with mine.
Truthache, I like that a lot.
Yep.
So that would say, hey guys, it's your weekly truthache, or your God's comic cousin can see, but your Brad Stine Has Issues truthache
Yep.
of the week. I like it.
Yep, episode 1 is for the dentists. You will get a lot of calls after hearing this.
Well, I got an idea. What if this truthache is what I most think I have an expertise? And again, what I could be wrong. I might be giving myself access to some sense of value that doesn't exist. I'm just assuming. I'm just pretending. I'm hoping. But the one aspect of interacting, the interplay I have with people, that I think if I should have any right to an expertise, it's the idea of communicating in use of words, because I'm a stand-up comic. Plus, I also am an actor. Those words are important because they're telling a story. But obviously, most people that watch the show or like what I do or have seen clips, it's my stand-up comedy. And that is hopefully the use and the best leveraging of words to make a greater point in the end. So if that's the case, then truth, if it really has value, causes you to reconsider what you see, or again affirm even deeper what you're already to believe to be true. So the truth hurts. That's a very famous saying. Truth hurts. But since that's already been taken, you and me have decided to rename it in our own nomenclature that we will, in fact, copyright. And as you said, sell T-shirts. So, folks, the inaugural rant, or as Wyatt likes to call it, the soliloquy of this week's Truthache, and the word hate is examined. Let her rip, son. Why do Americans not get along and they're fighting all the time? Why do progressives and conservatives find themselves at odds? I'll tell you why. It's a control of language. Whoever controls the language controls the people. One of the things that progressives seem to believe is true about conservatives is that we fear people we disagree with. Oh, yes, you just fear that somebody is different than you. You just fear people that have a different behavior than you. You just fear people that just don't look like you, act like you. Fear is the word that is used. Why do progressives use this term? It makes them feel better about themselves. Listen, it's these guys' fear that causes them to be so bigoted and hateful and intolerant and not welcoming to people of all points of view. If you make the other guy the enemy, it gives you permission to treat them evilly, badly, and with deep discrimination, the whole time convincing yourself that you're the good guy. Now, I'm going to be very honest because that's what we need in America. Conservatives can do the same thing. So let's make this very clear. From this day forward, America, if we're going to get anywhere, we have to learn to agree, to disagree agreeably. One thing we do that is we don't get to assign a word to somebody we disagree with if it can't be proven. So if I think that you shouldn't be able to kill a baby, for example, is it because I fear abortion? No, it's because I think it's immoral because it's a human that's no longer alive simply because we didn't want it. Now, you don't have to agree with that. You can decide that a human baby inside of a human being isn't human until we decide it's human. And if you think that is an ethical, virtuous way to live your life, I can't stop you. I think that you're misguided and I think you're delusional. But hey, that's you living the way you need to live. You will face God because He is real, and that's when you will have to answer for what you have decided. But let's make this clear. I do not fear people that have different sexual behaviors than me. I do not fear people that identify differently than what it appears to be is real. I do not fear people that disagree with me. As a matter of fact, I want people that disagree with me to speak freely because I actually care about free speech, and you only do if you allow people to disagree and also to speak things you despise freely in the marketplace. That's what it means to be free. Not fear, free. And that's what conservatism does. Now, any conservatives out there that are calling people names, it's not helpful to our cause because we're supposed to be the true free thinkers, and we're the ones that are supposed to care about giving dignity to all points of view, even if that point of view isn't very moral. That's what it means to try to live a moral life. More importantly than conservatism, Christian. Christness, living like Jesus taught us to. That's what I've done with my podcast, Brad Stine Has Issues. It's what I do with my live event, Laugh While It's Legal. When I come into churches, I try to bring people to a place where they laugh, but also seek to be a disciple for the living God. That's who I am. That's what I'm standing for. So I'm going to continue to give you these little moments of truth, to see if we can find what's really going on and see if we can begin to fix it. But only when you independently, on your own, get introspective, see your own flaws, call them out, and try to live by balanced truth. That's why I'm here. That's what I'm trying to recommend for you and to inspire you. Will I get there? I don't know, but I'm giving it my best shot. So, from now on, remember this, progressives. We do not fear people different than us. We just disagree with them. And conservatives don't fear that these people are misapprehending ideas and making you look bad. Simply call it out for what is true. Do not malign or attack. But let's see if we can begin to realign and balance. What did I say? Agreeing to disagree agreeably. Takes discipline, takes maturity. Takes an adult. Good luck. Thanks. Well, as I said, this new segment, The Truthache, this day works about the word fear, its misuse and its abuse. I hope you enjoyed that. And if you did, write in your comments right now. Well, that was great, Brad. It's changed my life. I used to fear these kind of soliloquies, but now I embrace them because that's what it's all about. You know, it's funny because when I started this little rant or soliloquy or monologue or whatever word, because we've been all over the map today, I was talking about Put a Helmet On, my original, well, not the first, but certainly the first known project I ever did. And I was talking about how it had some interesting clips that have done real well virally over the years. But one of the things I talked about, and I began to move into it, was animal rights activism, because I was making a joke about how animals don't have moral perspectives and this and that. But I was trying to get even further down the road to the idea of a joke that I then sort of piggybacked on that about, well, hey, where's the bug rights activists? How come they don't have anybody taking care of them, protecting them, you know? People just stamp on bugs and squish bugs. And then I talked about, I think it's because bugs are stupid. And then I talked about how stupid flies were. But you know why? One of the jokes was having to do with windows and how glass windshield is something bugs can't grasp. Wyatt, I don't know if you've ever thought about this or not. My guess is no. That's why I'm me and you're you. But to a bug, glass is clear, so it doesn't understand. And by the way, just to not completely throw bugs under the bus, which clearly wouldn't be a happy, good thing, but because they'd be smashed. But here's the thing I was going to get at, Wyatt. Birds don't understand windows too. I don't know how many times I have a home that's next to a tree, and now suddenly you're just talking, minding your own business, boom, a bird runs into the window. So I think they either see the reflection of the tree and they think there's some limbs to land on, but I'm thinking that's got to be abrupt. If you were walking down the street, son, and suddenly just walked into a wall that wasn't there, not only does it take you by surprise and hurt, but it's got to be absolutely bewildering because you have no concept of the solidity of something that is clear. I saw a wasp today in my home trying to get out the window, and I literally relived my joke about flies because I said they understand one word, in. Open your door, all the flies come in, you shut it, they land on the glass, you open it to let them leave, and they're like, oh no, we're not falling for that again. So it's a funny joke about how they won't leave when you want them to, but boy, the moment it's open, they're inside. Well, a wasp was experiencing that. And I find myself frustrated trying to get it, opening it up, trying to grab it, trying to throw it out so it can go away. I don't kill them. I try to let them go live their lives. And they won't go where you send them. And it's frustrating. And Wyatt, it shouldn't be. You know why? Because they're bugs. And bugs are stupid.
I mean, have you seen a bug? Their brains cannot be that big.
Wyatt, I don't know what has happened to you in the last segment compared to this, but you
Don't
have
ask.
gotten really spooky.
Don't ask.
Did you suddenly leave our treasured
I'm just,
studio and you're now in a haunted house?
No, I'm just reliving Shakespeare. To be or not to be.
Or in this segment, two bees or not two bees.
Yeah.
That is the window.
Yeah. Yeah, that is it.
What happened,
Well,
Wyatt?
audience, this is what happens when your light goes off midstream.
Did you
Yeah.
lose your light?
Yeah, the battery died.
Really?
Yep.
I thought that's something you can charge and it'll last a whole segment.
Normally it does, yeah.
So what happened?
In fact, it doesn't last a whole segment, it lasts a whole month.
Nice. So what happened?
Well, chat, there's this little button on the lights
Yeah.
called a power button.
Power.
Now, when you turn off the power button,
Yeah.
the light goes off and it doesn't consume power.
So should the power button at that point be called unpower button?
No, because you can also
Former
flip it
power button?
on to turn the power on.
All right.
So it's the power button.
All right. So anyway.
But
yeah.
every once in a while, people do this thing called forget to turn it off after they're done recording.
Do you mean people or did you mean to mispronounce Wyatt?
Well, no. People all over the world have done this at least once. So, you know, today's my day. But tomorrow it might be David Hasselhoff who forgets to turn off the light. I don't know.
I don't know. Have we ever had David Hasselhoff on the show?
Nope, no, we haven't had David Hasselhoff or David Hasselhoff or whatever else you said.
Well, I would love to get him on the show and just ask him if he finds himself constantly forgetting the power button.
I would like to get him on here just to ask
Well,
him
you've
how to pronounce his
disparaged
last
him,
name.
son, and I'm thinking a lawsuit could be forthcoming. So I think what you should say is, I'm not saying he did that, and I would not think he would be
I am
stupid.
on record right now saying he 100% absolutely did do this tomorrow.
He forgot to.
Absolutely. Yes, this is libel. I want to be sued.
What is wrong with you? You want David to go around being accused of forgetting to turn the lights off in his
He's a
studio?
big boy. He has money. He can afford it.
He was on the SpongeBob movie, and I mean, that's...
Which I'm still totally not convinced that actually happened. There's no way.
What?
How do you get David Hasselhoff on Sponge movie?
I'll bet you $10 you can't tell me any TV show he was most famous for. So you said, you're acting like, oh, David Hasselhoff, how did they do that? As though you understand all of his credits.
Mm-hmm.
So what is his most famous credit of a TV show he was on? And don't look it up.
Well, he certainly was on a show.
Mm-hmm.
And that's good enough.
Mm-hmm. So you don't know.
MASH?
Mm-hmm. No.
Gilligan's Island?
No. Oh, but that almost gives you a little flavor. I'll give you this hint.
Okay.
Gilligan's Island has a reference point that might kind of help you find where David...
Lost?
No, but it does deal with the sun and the beach and lifeguarding. And Pamela Anderson in a
Who? Who's
bathing
that?
She was Tommy Lee's wife at a...
Who's that?
He was the drummer for a famous band.
Who?
I don't know. Baywatch was the name of the movie.
Baywatch,
He was in
I knew that.
Baywatch, and before that, he was in like something where a car was alive and he could drive the car, and it was a car that.
Herbie?
No, it wasn't Herbie, but it certainly could have been. But it was a fast car and a much more cool car. But it wasn't My Mother the Car, which was their first versions from 1965, using Dick Van Dyke's brother, the other Van Dyke, and it didn't last long. I remember when it was on. It was the guy's car. Okay, so his mother died, and she's reincarnated as his car. Yes.
Please tell me they actually refer to it as that.
No, it was. She reincarnated and became his car and would
but
talk
that
to
they
him.
actually call it reincarnated.
No, they didn't. They called it.
Oh, that is such a missed opportunity. No wonder the show didn't do too well. They couldn't get that joke to land.
Are you ready? You know what they called it?
What?
My Mother the Car. My Mother the Car. Now, in 1965, that was pushing the envelope, my friend. New Age beliefs, karma, right?
What was
reincarnation?
Too unrealistic. Like seriously.
Well, anyways, here's the point I was trying to get at, son. Is that it was, I forgot the name of the other Hasselhoff thing, but it just was funny to me that you were acting like, how did they get Hasselhoff? And then I knew, because you are not good at, you don't have any idea where Hasselhoff ever made his money, planted his flag, did his thing. But I will say this, ladies and gentlemen that are watching this amazing show, that yesterday, as we film, was Easter. And it was a representation, a remembrance, because we don't know the actual day, even though the conspiracy theorists would want to think we should. But it was the representation of, again, the single greatest day in human history, bar none. Nothing like it. Nothing comes close. Nothing even can be considered in the running for what Easter represented. The time that God was a man, holy smoke, that's hard to grasp. Proved it through miraculous things. Okay, yeah, maybe they just pretended or he did magic tricks. Though, as a former magician, trust me when I say 2,000 years ago, you can't fake walking on water without looking a little weak. Like, hey, look, he's walking on water, and where did he get those rafts attached to his feet? That seems odd. Nevertheless, there was no way to do it. But then he died and came back to life. And here's the thing that people forget, and they need to not forget if they care about the ramifications of this idea, and that is this. His people left him. They ran. They fled. They felt like their leader was gone. Now what do we do? And they were frightened. They thought the Romans were going to round them up and said, well, we noticed you were with that guy we just killed. You're gone now, too. We don't need any rabble-rousers in Rome. You heard me. No rabble-rousers in Rome. But something happened. And even the anti-Christian historian Bart Ehrman admits historically that Jesus existed and that he was crucified and that something happened that persuaded all of his disciples and his followers to continue to say not just that he was an amazing teacher that had something to leave humanity, that he's alive. You're not going to, he's back. He's here. He's the Messiah. He is the chosen one. He is the one that the Jewish prophets spoke about. He is the Son of Man and the Son of God. He is the true myth, as C.S. Lewis called him. He is the one time in history that the one thing that all atheists ask for, proof that God is here, did it and wrote about it and had it left. And then he said, now I'm moving on. And from this day forward, I will leave you my spirit. And now you get to replicate me on earth, little by little, step by step, one step at a time, inch by inch. From this day forward, you get to become my disciples if you want to. Not Christians. That word wasn't even invented yet. But as I've said and will say forever, to become a Christian is easy. Jesus did all the work on Good Friday and Easter. But to become a disciple is the choice to give your life away and, as Joe Rogan said, submit to this idea until you die. Not only is it a discipline, it is a commitment and a sacrifice of your life for the God that you know is true, who sacrificed his existence, mind-boggling, for his creation to stay with him forever. It is the only belief system not only that has proven itself to be true and real, but changed the world and gives hope to the hopeless, gives peace to the confused, gives meaning to those who feel life has no meaning. Folks, this is the ultimate truth. If you are not a Christ follower, the weird and odd and difficult thing is this. Once you believe in him, once you take the leap and say, I don't understand all of it, it all doesn't totally make sense to me, but I think it's true, and I'm going to choose to believe it's true. Once you do that leap, you'll see the truth. The scales come off your eyes. It all makes sense. You find true north. You find your balance. You find your meaning. You find your purpose. You find your Father. That is what yesterday, Easter, represents and gave to humanity. You know, there's been a lot of folks that don't want to believe in that. I don't know why. It's amazing, it's beautiful, but you have to jump in to know just how good the water feels. And there's a man that I have followed and watched for many years, his unbelievable radio show podcast in England, where he would bring in the greatest apologists like William Lane Craig, which we just had on a couple of weeks ago, and Roger Penrose, a physicist who was a partner with Stephen Hawking in postulating quantum mechanical ideas and concepts. And he's an atheist, and they would debate. I mean, he had some amazing, wonderful, interesting dialogues and debates amongst believers and non-believers. And so he's seen the best the best and the worst of defending our faith and those who would attack it. And in the midst of these many, many years of that journey, he's still a Christian. He even wrote a book about it. And that's what we're going to talk about. Why I'm still a Christian. So, thanks for showing up. Please like, share, subscribe to my YouTube channel, listen on Spotify and iTunes, on Life Audio, and please enjoy this interview with God's comic Brad Stine and Justin Brierley. Well, this is a big, big, big day for me. Probably not so much for my guest, but then again, oftentimes they're doing penance somewhere, and so they agree to come on my show. But this particular guest is somebody that I've actually watched and admired for quite a few years. As you guys know, Christian worldview has been what I have inculcated into my stand-up comedy for many years, and that makes me a little unique and unorthodox. But in order to do that well, I got to go learn and grow and get theology and apologetics and logic and reason and philosophy. And so when I find people that do that well, I stick with them. And this particular gentleman, for 17 years, was doing it really well on a podcast, or maybe actually a radio show called Unbelievable. Had some of the greatest conversations I've ever had, and I really watched, and I really enjoyed it. And now he's a co-host with Re-Enchanting on the I can't see without my glasses because I haven't been healed yet. All right. On the Seen and Unseen Network. But he's an author, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Brand new book coming out April 22nd, Why I'm Still a Christian. So apparently it was up for grabs, and somehow he has maintained the faith. So please welcome Justin Brierley to Brad Stine Has Issues. Hello, my brother.
Hi, Brad. Lovely to meet you, and thanks for having me on.
Well, as I said in my intro, I don't give intros lightly. I have watched your show Unbelievable for many years, and man, the guests you had were hard to compete with. So it's been great to have you on. Well, listen, I know you only have 50 minutes, so I want to get right into it and use your time. Thank you for coming on and spending some time with me. But I wanted to start about your book. I was thinking about it. I got to read the galleys, and I'm glad I did because it gives me a little bit of an overview of who you are and what you're all about. I already knew that, but the book specifically, I wasn't sure about. It's Christian worldview, but with a taste of organic kind of personal experience. And so to me, it's kind of like a modern day, and I know this is going to be quite a moniker to place upon you, but kind of a modern day Mere Christianity. Because the thing I loved about Mere Christianity was not only did C.S. Lewis deal with worldview, and for many of us, it was the first time we ever even understood Christian worldview, but he made it very palatable, very easy to digest, to understand. It wasn't deep theology. I mean, it was deep theology, but he was able to couch it in a way that was easy to understand. And so you talk about your life experiences, the people you've met, the things you've done, and yet you also break down some of the big issues of life and some proofs of God through some of the greatest philosophical arguments known to man. So is there anything you would like to add to that before we jump right into that, as far as what you think your book is going to represent and what you're hoping people will get out of it?
Yeah, well, it is a very lofty comparison to compare it to Mere Christianity, which is an absolute classic, as you know. But yeah, I guess I'm trying to do something along the same lines as C.S. Lewis did, to make the case for God accessible to mere mortals. And yeah, as you say, over 17 plus years of hosting the Unbelievable show, I had some amazing minds join me. I think what I tried to do, by and large, was to make those minds accessible through the dialogue and debate we had. And in a way, yeah, the book really does try to bring a lot of those conversations into a format where I can show actually that Christian faith makes sense.
Yeah.
That you don't have to throw your brain in the trash can to be a Christian. On the contrary, it's in my opinion one of the most coherent ways of looking at the world when compared with, for instance, atheism. So that's what I'm trying to do with the book. And you're right. It's not about trying to defend a very specific version of Christianity. It's just saying, let's look at the core claims of Christianity.
Yeah.
Do they stand up to rational inquiry? And as I say, I do believe they do actually.
Well, I do too, but I will say this, and I hope that, Christians are always the most proficient truth tellers. I feel like, especially in the last few years, watching what happened with Corona and a real unmasking of the powers that be that seem to run the world that a lot of us normal people, peasants, didn't know. There is a big agenda out there. I think it's spiritual. I think it's a deeply dark, divisive, lying-driven ideology. But of course, that would be the beginning, right? That's Satan. He is the father of lies. But we saw a lot of that happening in the Corona, and even in the last 100 years or so of not respecting Christianity like the West used to do, and it has come with a price that even when Richard Dawkins has to suck it up and go, I'm thinking I'm a cultural Christian. It's like something has gone terribly awry or terribly well that it would bring him to be able to utter those words. But the thing that I did want to bring up to the people, and I do highly recommend this book, especially if you've never done any deep dive into theology or apologetics. It will be a great opening primer for you to understand ideas in a deeper level, but in a very, very well written way. So it's very accessible. You don't have to be intimidated that it's academia. It's not that way at all. But just to give you guys some of the contents of why I'm still a Christian, the chapters: God makes sense of human existence, of human value, of human purpose, the evidence for Jesus. This is crucial. If Jesus isn't risen from the dead, we're wasting our time, especially on Sundays. Facts that only fit the resurrection. Atheist greatest objection is suffering. Absolutely. I think probably the greatest reason there are atheists is the problem of pain. And frankly, it might be the hardest issue for me as a believer to deal with. It is so, as we tape this, the butchering on February 14th in the Congo of Christians, the destruction in Syria right now of my fellow brothers and sisters, who, by the way, are just like us. They're just regular guys, got a mom, got a dad, got a wife, got kids, just want to be left alone. Nope, we're going to kill you. And we have to reconcile with what happened to the God that we think would intervene and stop this and bring the angels down upon these people. And the fact is, Justin, he doesn't a lot of times. So
Mm,
these are a
mm,
lot of times
yeah,
we have to grapple with these things. But
yeah.
I kind of wanted to start at the beginning, unless you want to comment on any of that. I'll jump into
Well,
some.
only to say I feel exactly the same as you do, Brad. And the problem is, in a way, that in our 24-hour news cycle, we are constantly connected with all kinds of suffering and injustice around the world. So it's only sort of heightened that sense of what's wrong with the world and so on. But the reality is, I would say the Bible itself is absolutely clear that this is the kind of world we live in, and it has the reasons within it for why this kind of a world exists. I think sometimes there's a danger of kind of turning into a purely philosophical question when actually there's a way of understanding evil and suffering from within the Christian worldview, from within the story we've been given in Scripture. And at the center of that story, of course, is Jesus Christ, and he did something about evil on the cross. I mean, that's a big question to open up, but that's sometimes what I think is missing. Sometimes when we approach these subjects, we can kind of treat them as purely kind of philosophical, almost games to kind of work out. Whereas I think for people who are actually suffering, going through, if you are in the Congo or, among those who were massacred in the Rwanda genocide or something like that, it's only really the hope of Christ that can ultimately give you any hope in the midst of that awful kind of suffering. There won't be much help, even if you have a good philosophical theodicy, as it were. It's really the hope of Christ that makes the actual difference for people who are going through suffering.
It does, but I will say this: you have to reimagine Christianity. I think there's been a great disservice done in the West towards what is expected of Christians,
Mm,
because the truth is, nothing was expected of Christians, it
mm,
seems, in the
mm,
West. And
mm,
if you accept Jesus Christ as your Savior, and of course, I'm in the U.S., so if I'm in whatever, Idaho or Massachusetts, maybe I'll get some snickers, or maybe I'll get some, oh, you're intolerant, or you're bigoted with your archaic religion. I might get some of that. Nobody's going to shoot me. Nobody's going to cut my head off. But if I'm in Iran or Iraq, Afghanistan, or Myanmar or India or China or North Korea or Pakistan, or I mean the myriad of places where
mm,
people just like
mm,
you and me accept Jesus as their savior, they don't just say bow your head, close your eyes, okay, you're in now. They also say, just
mm,
so you know, you may not
mm,
survive this. And they
mm,
say,
mm,
okay, that's part of it. Okay. Well, why do you think the church grows in these areas of persecution?
mm,
Because these
mm,
dudes clearly are all in. They are saying
mm,
if that's what it takes. And Justin, I don't know that in the West there has ever, or at least Christians ever felt like there was anything at stake to become a
yeah.
believer. And so it
Uh,
cost us nothing, thus we took it for granted. And here we sit.
Yeah, absolutely. And the fact that we have created in the West, sadly, a very comfortable form of Christianity where, you know, we, it's an interesting one because I've heard some Bible scholars and theologians talk about the fact that the problem of suffering only really gets talked about in Western circles, in Western Christian circles. It's only ironically the parts of the world which are, in fact, the safest, most comfortable, where people seem to have a problem. If you go to the most persecuted parts of the church, those parts of the world where life is most difficult, the Christians who are living there actually don't tend to complain about, why would God allow all this suffering all that much? Because it's kind of, I think there's just an acceptance that this
Yeah.
is the way the world is, and we
Yeah.
have to live in it, and we have to
Yes.
trust God through it.
Yeah.
So it's a kind of it's a curiously kind of Western phenomenon in a
Yes.
funny way, that whole question of suffering.
Well, and I also noticed that when I would hear about Christians in China, they when they would suffer, their response. See, I think in the West, I wasn't really necessarily going this the problem of pain first, but since we're here, I figured why not? Maybe this is
Mm,
very important to people that are watching this. Um, is that in China, when they go through it, they say, "Thank you, God, for allowing me to share in your suffering." Now, that sounds like a nice, I don't know, phrase perhaps one is using in a homily or in some kind of high church moment that we all repeat and it feels noble, but they're serious. Oh, I
mm,
get to
mm,
continue
mm,
in the legacy of the crucifixion, of the challenge
mm,
of a
mm,
crucified life, because that's what it said. I got to tell you, Justin, I've been a Christian my whole life, and it's almost like in the recent years when I decided I've learned something I have never for somehow have never processed. We were never called to be Christians. We were called to be disciples. And that's a whole different thing because Jesus does all the work. He
mm,
dies, he resurrects, he provides the sacred sacrifice, he
mm,
redeems.
mm,
But discipline, where we get disciple, means now I get to partner. Your turn
mm,
to carry a
mm,
cross. Your turn to get crucified. Your turn to die. I mean, we all experience horrible difficulties in our lives. Everybody has. And we always see it in the West, I think, often as an aberration, as a punishment that we're supposed to overcome. And I think what God's
mm.
saying is, oh, no, 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 no. I'm trusting you with this pain.
Yeah,
You're going to die from it. You'll resurrect from it. You'll heal others with it. Welcome to replicating Jesus. And it's like, wait, you're serious. This is
yeah,
what
yeah,
it's supposed to look like. And
yeah,
it
yeah.
just doesn't appear to be what
I
we're
mean,
normally taught.
you look at the early church and the first followers of Christ, and I mean, it was hardly a kind of invitation to some prosperous, wealthy, health and wealth lifestyle. Pretty much all of the disciples of Jesus faced horrific deaths.
Yes.
They died for their faith. They were beaten, they were stripped, they were killed. When Jesus invited them on this adventure of following him, he invited them to something really hard and to something that would require their whole lives. And that you have to take that seriously. Now we happen to live, in the West at least, in a relative comfort, with relatively few things, as you say, that genuinely are, we could say, are forms of persecution. So that's why, you look at those parts of the world where Christians are living out their faith that way, and you have to say, well, you can see why it matters so much. I love the phrase, actually, I don't know if you've come across it, by Corrie Ten Boom, who if you know her story, has this extraordinary story of having been a Christian who lived through a concentration camp during World War II after trying to help Jews escape Nazis, and she had this amazing story of coming through that, losing her sister Betsy in the process, coming to terms with what the Germans had done to her and her family, finding a way to forgive them through Christ, but also experiencing real suffering. And she said, it's often only when Jesus is all you have that you realize that Jesus is all you need. And I think that's often true of people. It's only once you're in the situation where the only option you've got is Jesus that you suddenly realize, actually, that's all I needed in the end. But it's a hard lesson to learn. You know, it's one, in a sense, I pray that you and I will never have to learn, but it's a lesson that lots of people have learned, that ultimately, when Jesus is all you have, Jesus is all you need.
But like I said, in all my years of being a believer, and I became a Christian at 9, I think it's only in the last few years, and I'm on the other end of my life, brother. I mean, it's legacy time and leave whatever God has left to me. But only now am I understanding the depth of what was really should have been expected all along. We do want comfort, oftentimes in the West. We do want things to just be simple. Let me get married. Let me have kids. Let me go on vacation. Let me have food. It's just the basics of life we presume should be expected. And I don't know that that's Christian, especially when we get comfort from phrases about, I've learned in all things to be content, and we get great power from that. And then you think, you were aware the guy writing this was in chains and he was in prison, right? As he's writing the words, he's saying, I'm still good. And it's like, no, I don't want to do that. I'd like to read about it. I don't, but I don't want to play. And he goes, well, then you ain't one of mine, because this is real. This is Christianity is hard. It's not easy. And if it's easy, it probably isn't Christian. Well, listen, I don't want to get off on all these philosophical tangents, even though they're important. I hope maybe it helps somebody out there who's suffering right now. But let's get to some of the content of some of the things that was said, because I got to tell you something. I'm having you on today as we record, and actually after you, I will be speaking with William Lane Craig. So I'm speaking with two people who I greatly admire as apologists and philosophers. But I got to tell you something. Well, I'm a comic. You may or may not be familiar with my work here in the UK, so probably not, but maybe. I mean, I'm on YouTube, and that everybody can see that. But one of the things that I've always tried to do is use Christian worldview as my social commentary. So if whatever I'm talking about, and I joke about everything, I believe that where comedy is great is when it deals with culture, when it deals with the cultural issue. It's not political. I'm not picking parties. It's not a Trump rally. It's about, what is the culture doing? Because that's what I'm supposed to redeem as a believer, is what are we doing, and in a presuming is the normative and the foundational moral structure that we're supposed to live by. So I did try to inculcate that into my comedy. But comedy also is pretty dangerous in that we're the ones that got to make fun of the king and not get our heads cut off. We were always given a pass that others weren't. And culturally, it was accepted. So we were given a particular position that was agreed upon, so that we could be a little bit more taboo breaking, a little bit more irritating, a little bit more almost inappropriate, to be ironic, to make a point about a deeper issue. But sometimes people interpret that as, oh, you're not being very Christian. I go, well, I'm a comic. This is a different category distinction as to how I'm delivering this information. But I do notice this. It's made me much more challenged to be avuncular. I mean, guys like you, guys like John Lennox, all you UK guys are like either the nicest guys in the world, or I don't know. So it's the T, but you're very, of course, William Lane Craig, have this very kind. Oh, Stephen Meyer, I've had on a couple times. I don't know how you do that, because I get angry at atheists, and I'm not, and I'm going to tell you why. Not because they disagree with me, but because of two reasons. One, I think atheism is built on a two-legged stool, anger and arrogance. That's all I ever see in one form or the other. But also because I get frustrated with these very intelligent people, by the way. Very intelligent. I'm not talking about the internet atheists that are just cut and paste guys. I'm talking about the guys like Alex O'Connor's or, or Dawkins or whatever, who deeply understand deep thinking, but how completely disconnected they are to how their worldview doesn't work if it was true. They always borrow from Christians. For example, in the first chapter of God Makes Sense of Human Existence, I believe that was the one that had the teleological argument, or the fine-tuning argument, perhaps. So let's talk about that quickly, and maybe you can help summarize some of these
Yeah.
arguments just to give people a taste of what they're going to get if they get your book.
Yeah, absolutely. But just to come back to your first point, though, about that kind of frustration that you feel, and I guess, I mean, I think God put me in the position to be able to host these conversations because I've always had a fairly unflappable, sanguine kind of approach to things, and so I just found that I didn't get too riled, even when an atheist was saying potentially quite condescending or coming across in a kind of maybe arrogant or patronizing way.
Yeah.
I totally understand people who do feel like that, though. And to be honest, I don't think that has worn well, from that new atheist era anyway. I think one of the reasons that the new atheist thing, with those very kind of dismissive, snide, rude kind of ways in which they came across with people like Sam Harris and Dawkins and Hitchens, I think one of the reasons the new atheism kind of ended up waning, failing, was because actually people kind of got tired of the tone. They feel there was a lot of rhetoric, but not a lot of substance to what they had to say. And honestly, a lot of the time when I was in the middle of a conversation where an atheist was maybe acting like that, I just thought, well, you know what, come back in a couple of years' time and let's see whether this still feels edgy or cool or whatever. And frankly, it just hasn't aged well, that stuff. And I just think it's important to take the long view when you're a Christian. Don't kind of play by those same rules. If you kind of allow yourself to get annoyed or het up or kind of respond in kind, I just think you're kind of taking the bait in a way. And I just think it's important to, whether someone's kind or mean-spirited, just be Christian, in response. It's difficult. Obviously, it's difficult. It's not easy, but I think that's the important thing to do.
Well, I think
go ahead. Sorry.
Well, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I think that what is impossible is to separate your religious belief from a very, very personal experience. It's as close as it gets to to the most foundational way you see the world, and so you take it very personally. So to mock my God, so to speak, or whatever, is a deep insult. They use the word Jesus Christ as an epithet. They don't say the N word, right? They don't say retarded. I don't know, that all these words that became verboten are off the table to be sensitive, and yet the number one religion in the world, Christianity, and the number one persecuted religious people on earth, the Christians. Let's just throw away their savior's name as though it's irrelevant. So their insensitivity to others, and yet claiming we don't need God to be good. It's like, well, you need something because you ain't doing good, very good. But I wonder to myself, I was going to ask this to Dr. Craig, but I'll ask you this thing because, again, you would be an expert. You've dealt with so many of these guys. Throughout human history, from the most primeval human, whatever they are, I don't know how many years back that would be, the first ones that communicated that we have access to this most 2025, when we're recording this, the most advanced time in human history. One thing for sure is humans and villages and cultures and in countries and peoples have always more believed in God or gods than not. It's always been the norm. There's something else. So the outlier is the atheist. They're the aberration. They're the ones that chose something that nobody else saw. So and because they take their faith, right, in no God, very personally, and maybe that's why they respond the way they do, because they're irritated and feeling their religion is being attacked. And that's kind of the question I would have for you is, could it be fair to say that if everything that drives who you are the way you think, the way you vote, the way you behave, where your morals come from, where you come up with meaning, how you think you should treat others. That foundation used to be called religion. That's how you see things, and it drives your behavior. Would it be fair to say that atheism isn't just a disbelief in God, but in fact is a secular religious cult that these people have accepted?
I think there's definitely a brand of atheism, which is precisely that. And going back to that new atheist era with these big characters like Richard Dawkins, Christopher Hitchens, and so on, I think it did become quite quasi-religious. I mean, arguably these four so-called horsemen of the new atheism were the high priests of a movement, and they had their sacred texts, these best-selling anti-God books that they'd all written, and they had their kind of worship gatherings, and their object of worship arguably was science, because that was seen as the great savior that will, bring mankind to, a future and a flourishing and utopia. And there was a kind of creed as well, naturalism. There was a sort of a creed that all that exists is matter in motion, that we can explain everything from it. And even fellow atheists, people like, there were a number of atheist philosophers like Thomas Nagel, who started to talk about purpose in nature and that kind of thing. And they were hounded and, zealously kind of described as heretics by the new atheists at the time. So that, it was definitely quasi-religious in the end. And I think all that tells us is that people are kind of innately religious, even when they claim not to be. It's very difficult to actually sort of stamp the religion out of people. And as much as the new atheists tried to do that, all they ended up doing, as you say, was creating another form of religion in the process.
Of course.
And the funny thing is that now that the new atheism has kind of collapsed in on itself, arguably, they're no longer really trying to kind of debate Christians. They've actually turned their attention to the quasi-religions of kind of culture now. So whether it be kind of LGBT issues, social justice issues, these things that now, again, which have a kind of quasi-religious dynamic to them, are the big enemies in their own academic backyards. So it's very interesting to me that in the end, you may not get religious about Christianity, but you will be religious about something because it's kind of baked in. Yeah. And the question is it the true God or a false God? And unfortunately, people often go after the false idols, don't they?
Well, I think that what you just said is exactly kind of the point that has frustrated me so much. And by listening to your show, unbelievable, and listening to atheists, and listen, I'm a high school graduate, I'm a comedian, I'm an idiot. What do I know? But I tried to understand the world the best I could, and I did my own study. I'm an autodidact, so that stuff interested me. Philosophy interested me. Apologetics interested me. Logic and reason interested. It doesn't interest most people. It happened to interest me, and I can use it in my comedy. So it fit well for what I was trying to do, which is make a broader stance on an idea and use a funny way to get there. But you just said something interesting about this idea of religious countenance, which I think we all have. And of course, they would bristle at that. No, I don't. No. But this is part of the nuance I think they miss. When I say religion to you atheists, I'm not saying you believe in God, but I'm saying whatever drives you and gives you ultimate purpose is sacred. I mean, it's bigger than material because you don't live like there's just material. That's the part. They live in pure hypocrisy and somehow can't see it. And I don't want to believe in it. It's like they can't see it. I'm going to make a point about this, what you just said, and I'll have to put on my glasses, so forgive me. Lawrence Krauss was in your book, and he was, I don't remember if he was in The Human Value or The Existence, or maybe it was Purpose, but this was, I wrote this down. He made a fascinating statement where they were talking about, I think it was with John Lennox, and John, of course, is brilliant. Oh my gosh, I'd love to talk to him on one of these podcasts. But he does what needs to be done to help the atheists overcome their materialistic presupposition. And that is this: science is a beautiful art form. It was created by Christians. And I mean, at least modern science was created by Christians, as you know, in the Middle Ages. Scientific method, inductive, deductive, all that. The fact that the world we can count on it to behave in a certain way, thus we can make predictions. Couldn't have happened unless there was a God that put the machinery in motion. We could assume it would behave exactly the same way continuously. But what they project upon science is a huge mistake. Science is physics. It observes and it draws conclusions. Who, what, when, where, and how. It's descriptive and it does a great job. But they try to grab one more word that doesn't belong to them, and that, of course, is why, the second most powerful three-letter word in human history. Because once you go into why, you've left physics, you're into metaphysics, which they say they don't believe in. And so why, of course, means there's a reason why we do science. There's a reason why we're trying to find truth. There's a reason why we want an actual conclusion that comports to reality, because it matters that we find this meta-narrative to give us reason to exist. So he says, we don't need a why question. This is in your book. We don't need a why question because it presumes we're trying to arrive at a true conclusion. If there is no purpose, the question is irrelevant. And I'm like going, Larry, Lawrence, this is, so I'm going to use your years of expertise and your wonderful demeanor to help me talk me off the ledge. Lawrence Krauss is saying there is no ultimate meaning in life, and that's where I find meaning, and doesn't see how absurdly counter intuitive that is, that you make a 500-page book reaching the conclusion life has no meaning, and you find meaning in the conclusion. Their inability to understand that without a meta-narrative, I'll find my own meaning is irrelevant. They can't see that. What am I missing?
Yeah, it was a fascinating interchange, that one between Lawrence Krauss and John Lennox. And for those who aren't too familiar with Lawrence Krauss, he's kind of a physicist by background, but very much one of those dogmatic new atheist types. Just absolutely discounts and dismisses God. So, I mean, it wasn't necessarily the most fruitful conversation, because in a way, when you've got John Lennox in the studio, you want to have someone who's willing to kind of engage him properly. But Lawrence Krauss was just kind of constantly dismissing. And one of the things he said, as you say, was this whole idea of the why questions. And he said, well, it's a pointless question. If there is no purpose beyond anything, then why is a pointless kind of question? And John Lennox was just kind of astonished, really, at Lawrence Krauss's lack of curiosity, almost, because he just sort of stops almost without any cause at the physical universe. So that's where we have to somehow draw the line. We can't ask any further questions beyond the fact there is a physical universe. And I just, like John Lennox, I would say, well, why stop there? Why would you assume that the physical universe is all there is? That's a completely unwarranted assumption in the first place. The fact is, science itself can't explain itself. The fact we live in a universe that can be explained in terms of laws of physics, where we can use mathematics to map out the physical nature of the universe, that itself is an extraordinary thing.
Yeah.
And to simply say, well, you're not allowed to ask questions about that because it kind of goes beyond science. Well, that's just a kind of unwarranted kind of stopping point that you have created. And there's absolutely no reason why you shouldn't ask the next question, which is, why is there science? Why can we explore the universe? Why is there a universe? And Lawrence Krauss never gave a satisfactory answer to that. I think what he was doing was he was showing his atheist bias. He doesn't want there to be a God. He doesn't want there to be further questions than the ones science can answer. But the reality is, life, the way we live life, is constantly in ways that science cannot ultimately answer. Science is great for some kinds of questions about physical stuff and the interaction of the natural laws of the universe. But science isn't going to tell you what you're worth, because it's not designed to. It's not going to tell you what your purpose is, because it can't. It's not going to tell you how you should act, because that's just not what it's designed for. So these people like Lawrence Krauss, who think science is the de facto answer to everything, they've got such a limited view of the world by doing that. And you know, we both love science, I imagine. You know, Brad, you and I, we're glad that science has been used to create the kind of technology we're now able to talk to each other on and everything else. All that's great, but like that's that. But if that's it, then it's a tiny segment of actual human experience that science is actually designed to speak to. So I just think people like Lawrence Krauss are kind of very short-sighted, really, if they can't see that science has a place, but it is just not, it just doesn't answer the ultimate questions, which are crying out to be answered, you know.
Well, intrinsically, we behave as though we're looking for the answers. That's my point. And I think that's what I was trying to find with you, because you would have such a unique vantage point, because you sat down face to face with these people. I mean, the highest intellects of physics and atheism, materialism, as well as apologetics and philosophers and so forth. So I guess what I was looking for from you, Justin, is if you felt like you could get a sense of their, if there's a continuity to being an atheist, a something about their spirit, about their personality, about their what drives them, perhaps, is there something in common that causes them to be so smart in so many ways and be so disconnected when you give them a philosophical absolute? If there's no ultimate meaning, if there's no meta narrative, then when you tell me, no, no, I just make my own meaning, I said, no, no, no. The meta narrative is the novel. It's got a beginning, it's got a middle, and the end. If you write a chapter in that book, that's fine. But if the book is burned, your chapter is irrelevant. Well, that's what's going to happen in the universe. It's all disappearing. It's all going bye-bye eventually. And so nothing that we hold on to, including us Christians, will have any relevance or any remembrance unless there is an afterlife and we're into another realm, which is what we believe. So you may not like that conclusion, but for them not to even grasp and accept that as, you're right, yeah, I guess it all disappears. Oh, well, fine. Now you've been at least honest with me. But don't pretend like you have a volition reaching a place that matters. Please don't pretend like it has an end game that we should all be grateful we've reached, because there is none. Why are you having a conversation with me, atheist? Why do you continue to go on podcasts? Why do you write books? Why are you doing any of this if you're about to die and go into eternal oblivion, and the rest of us will follow in the next 10 million years or whatever it's going to be? So I guess, and maybe there's no answer to this, but as you can see, I'm frustrated. How do these intelligent guys miss this obviously disconnected truth in the way they live compared to the way they think is true? Do you have any sense
Well,
of what
I guess I have a theory for that. Again, I share your kind of sense of, wow, shouldn't it be more obvious that there is an underlying meaning and purpose, and when you're kind of even doing science, the question is, well, why even do it if ultimately this is all going to disappear, as you say, in the heat death of the universe? I think what I've often encountered when I've spoken with atheists, people who are committed to the kind of very hard-boiled naturalism, is they've often been inculcated into just a particular worldview, a way of seeing things. And I think in a way that's true of all of us. We all look at life through a certain lens. And when someone's kind of really convinced themselves that there is no God, that all that exists is matter in motion, they kind of often just choose, in a sense, to see everything that way. Even the questions that seem to go against, even the natural instincts that seem to rail against this idea that it's all just matter in motion and it'll all pass away at some point. I mean, what's really interesting is that I've had some conversations, genuine conversations with some atheists, where they're so wedded to that worldview, that naturalist worldview, that their presuppositions are so kind of fixed that there's almost no evidence you could offer them that would persuade them out of it. So often, we often hear from those kinds of atheists, well, if only there were more evidence for God or for Christianity, then I would believe. But I'm not convinced of that sometimes, because I remember I had Peter Atkins in my studio once, opposite quite a well-known Christian physicist, Hugh Ross of Reasons to Believe. And they were kind of going back and forth on whether the fine-tuning of the universe and other aspects of science kind of point towards God. And Peter Atkins is an atheist chemist from Oxford, and he's very, very dismissive, almost to the point of it's almost pantomime, really, just how much of a kind of curmudgeonly kind of character he is, and how much he dismisses Christianity as poppycock and delusional and so on.
Is he
But
the
anyway,
one that had the famous interaction with William F. Buckley and William Lane Craig, where that kind of went a meme?
yeah, that's
Okay,
the one. You got the
okay,
guy. You got the
okay,
guy.
okay.
Anyway, so he's kind of doing his curmudgeonly atheist thing and saying, "Oh, there's absolutely no evidence. It's all just delusional, wishful thinking." And so eventually, kind of, Hugh Ross kind of got a bit sort of, frustrated, and he said, "Well, look, is there any kind of evidence I could offer you that would move you any closer?" And sort of, Atkins said, "Well, it would depend on the evidence," and so we started to offer some sort of hypothetical forms of evidence just to see if there was anything that could move the dial for him. And we said, what if the stars lined up and said, "Peter, it's God. It's really time you started believing in me"? And he said, "Well, no, I wouldn't believe that, because it could be down to advanced alien technology." And I was like, "Okay, that won't do it. Okay, well, what if Jesus appeared to you right now in this room and said, 'Time to believe in me, Peter, time to come home'?" And he said, "Well, I'd assume I was having some kind of brain seizure. That would be the explanation." And we were like, "Well, in that case, it sounds like there's literally nothing that would convince you, because you're so wedded to your atheist naturalism. You run every kind of evidence through
Yes.
that filter, and you create some kind of naturalistic kind of way of seeing it." And we said, can you think of anything that would persuade you? And he said, "Well, now I think of it. No, I can't. I can't think of anything that would persuade me to change my mind." And I think at that point, you've got to say, what that person, that atheist, needs is not more evidence. They've decided what they believe, and they are running all the evidence through a filter that simply does not include God.
Yeah.
What that person needs is a change of heart.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
there's something else happening. There's a spiritual issue here, not just some kind of evidential, rational issue. So I think there's a kind of point at which you have to just, in the end, pray for someone who's in that position, rather than try to argue with them, because, as I
Yeah.
say, some people just are wedded to their worldview.
As am I, right? I mean, you could call me arrogant or a bigot as a Christian, because I am intolerant of belief systems that say Jesus isn't God. I mean, literally, let's just use words properly. Sometimes to be adamant is simply righteous indignation. Either it's true or it's not. And if it is, I need to behave as such. It should be serious, and it should be aggressive at times, because it is literally eternity what one is grappling with. If this is true to us, what a responsibility we have to tell somebody, buddy, you don't understand what you're doing, but it is un, un you know impossible for you to grasp the choice you are making to walk away from God. And it's interesting, because when we talk about meaning in the book, folks, remember, Why I'm Still a Christian. I think you've gotten a great opportunity to see how he thinks, how Justin thinks, and the book is wonderful. Please get it. It comes out April 22nd, by the way. So grab it, and it's going to give you some wonderful insights into your faith. But to me, I always go back to teleology. That's the one thing that cannot be accounted for in an atheist worldview. If we are here by accident, then we quite likely aren't even having conversations, especially if you're a determinist. We're locked into a movie that was recorded in our brain. It's replayed over and over. I can't not believe, because it's the way I was recorded. You can't not not believe, because that's where you were determined. So consequently, we're not really even having a conversation, because we're both stuck in a film that's never going to change. It always ends the same, because it's already pre-recorded. And yet nobody believes that way. And I think that is part of my challenge to the atheist, is why can't you break out of the delusion you have to live by just to function in your life. Um, if meaning is the ultimate proof that there must be something bigger than this, an architect, an engineer, then when one says, I make my own meaning, they are literally saying, I worship myself because I create meaning, and meaning only can come from a transcendent source, which in my case is me. So it's a very, dangerous place, but you know what? It's original sin, man. Pride is the original sin. We're getting about 5 minutes left. If you got a hard stop in 5 minutes, then I certainly don't want to take your time. If you got a little leeway, let me know. Otherwise, I'll try to wrap her up. But
yeah, unfortunately, I do have another
okay,
recording
okay, all right,
after this
all
one,
right.
so maybe
I
we could
always,
come
I
back
always, I
for a
always
round
take a
two, Brad.
shot that I can find another.
No, I
Don't
get that.
worry, I do it
Yeah,
all the time.
I've done it plenty of times myself.
But so let me say this. I have subscribers that I always have a bonus question just for them, just for people that are interested in what I do and help my ministry and my grandson has issues. So I guess what I would like to ask you, Justin, perhaps we can have a conversation again sometime because this
Mm,
is very fascinating.
mm,
Maybe when
mm,
we get close to your book coming out. But
mm,
what I'd like to ask you is this. So, of all the amazing interviews you've had, and perhaps, or maybe just in correspondence you've had, emails, I don't know, who has, if any, been the most well-known atheist or agnostic that you converted? That said, you know
ooh,
what? Been watching your stuff, heard your thing. I got to tell you something. I'm in. I want you guys.
wow.
What would and maybe there isn't that amazing story, but
Yeah,
anything
well,
like that, the one that you could say, you're not going to believe this, but this happened once. What would be that answer? Hey guys, I'm interrupting my own interview. If you want the answer that you haven't heard yet, go to bradstine.com and join one of the three tiers. It is the militia of the mind, it is the warrior level, or it is the special forces. And then you'll get all kinds of special content and bonus answers to make you smarter than you could ever imagine. Go there now, jump on and join the Mighty 10,000. That is, obviously we always feel excited to think there was some fruit involved because sometimes we don't know, we don't see it, we don't know what's happening.
mm,
I got you. I'm going to have Dr. Craig and so forth and a few others to really set a foundation. I wanted to have a series on atheists with atheists and try to understand, not a gotcha. I just wanted to understand how do you function. I'd love to get like an Alex O'Connor, Darren Brown. I don't know if you know this. I was a professional
mm.
magician for many years,
Ah,
so I know all about Darren Brown. I know how his stuff works. I mean, I'm like fairly sophisticated in that. So guys like that. So if you know a way I can contact these guys or give me a vetting, I'd
hey,
love to have a chance to have a conversation with them. But folks, this is Justin Brierley. He does have a book that will, I mean, when this airs, it'll probably be around the time it's hit the market. April 22nd, Why I'm Still a Christian. If you are still a Christian, this book will make it even more reason why. If you are not a Christian, it might just get you that way. And if you completely despise Christians, maybe it'll at least give you another way to see us and think about us, and that we're not intolerant, bigoted, hateful people, but in fact, literally love you enough to have you hate us because we do think there's something grander and we're willing to put our life on the line for you. So, folks, remember, if they say you're being politically incorrect, always say thanks for the compliment, because if you're a Christ follower, you're the last truth teller on earth. I'm just a comic here in the U.S. Justin's an intellect in the UK, but I'm just doing what I'm supposed to do, putting the woke back to sleep. See you next Monday.